Hello, everyone. Today, we are starting off a brand new YouTube series for myself. We are running the Never Surrender scenario, but with a few added mods to help this serve kind of a dual purpose. The primary focus of this little series is going to be a tutorial on Industrial Overhaul, one of my favorite framework mods for altering progression and certain aspects of gameplay within Space Engineers. With the end goal being that we'll build up a base and get ourselves built up well enough that we can build a capital class ship and take it to the space base and defend that against the incoming waves of drones. So, not entirely sure how many episodes this is likely going to take. Um, I'm going to start off with, I'm going to estimate probably between 5 and 10, just depending on how long it takes to find certain ores and um, how much editing I decide that I want to do. So, I've already got everything all set up, we are landed, and this is where we're at currently. Way up in the mountains on a nice sheet of ice. Nice snowbound area. We pick up our spectator cam. There's our pod. And that's our surroundings. So if there is one plus side to where we've landed, it is that we're not going to have to worry too much about power, because it's going to be very easy for us to get the hydrogen power generation started up right off the bat. So that's going to be to our benefit. So, a few fundamental changes with Industrial Overhaul you will run into almost right off the bat. First and foremost is that if we go into our survival kit, we have different components that we produce. Some of them, like the basic computer and electromagnet, actually require other components to build. Electromagnet requires iron ingot and copper wire, and the basic computer requires silicon wafers and copper wire. And as we get into the more advanced components, we'll start seeing that more and more. Additionally, we can refine more than just, we can do more than just the standard stone refining in the survival kit. If we happen to find sources of iron or copper, which is one of the new ores introduced, we can actually refine those directly in the survival kit as well. So we're not limited to just stone. So, as with any survival run, the first thing that you gotta do is get that stone. For us means punching down through a sizable layer of snow. And apparently, nice too. Perfect. I want to punch a little bit below that layer of ice, just to make sure that we're getting more stone than anything else, at least to start. And then, since this initial stage is something that pretty much all of you are going to be familiar with, I would imagine, we're going to go ahead and skip ahead a good portion of this, and we'll pick things back up once we get to the stage of building our starting platform. So I will see you guys then. Alright, so since we've got a bit of resources gathered and refined, we're still going to need a fair bit more. But we're at a point where we can start working on our platform. Now, I'm running just off of a standard 3x3 with a 12 block tall tower. 13 if you count the block in the ground. And from here, this is where things begin to diverge from what most of you are likely familiar with in a standard Space Engineers playthrough. First and foremost is our initial production block after the survival kit is not the basic assembler. So if we go into our G menu and come down to our production blocks, you'll notice that we have a lot more options now. So let's open up a new menu for that. The first thing that we're going to be wanting to build is the assembling bench. And this is what we're going to need to be able to eventually build the components for all the other equipment that we need. After that, we're going to want the wire jar, the plate stamp, and the extruder. And these will produce, the wire jar produces copper wire, gold wire, and superconductors. Plate stamp gives us our steel plate, our aluminum plate, which replaces the interior plate component, as well as titanium plate and armor plate, and composite armor, which both of those are combinations of other material types. Then the extruder will give us our girders, our large steel tube, and our small steel tube. Now the assembly bench will give us a lot of our basic components beyond what the survival kit will produce. But like the survival kit, it operates at a reduced efficiency for production. So each of these dedicated blocks will, they have a smaller list of what they can produce, but they do it at a higher efficiency. So, to an extent, you actually could run a decent portion of a playthrough with just what you can make from a assembly bench, but it's going to be incredibly time consuming compared to building out the other production blocks. So, those four are going, well, five, because the basic assembler is replaced with a fabricator. And then we have the full-scale assembler as well. And microelectronics factory. So once we get the assembling bench, we're going to need all the rest of these next 6 blocks to be able to produce everything that the assembly bench produces, and therefore, be able to remove the assembling bench from the grid. So, that's what we're going to start with. Also, something else with the Industrial Overhaul is scale. A lot of your blocks get a lot larger. So we have our wire jar that's 1x2, same with the extruder. The fabricator and assembler are the same size as what they are in vanilla. But then we get the plate stamp, which is 3 by 2 by 3. And the microelectronics factory, which is 2 by 2 by 1. But if you really want to get into some large stuff, you have the nano assembler, rock crusher, ore purifier, ceramics furnace, which it and the cement kiln and auto loom are all close to parity on size. Bitumen extractor, the nuclear reprocessor, uranium centrifuge, and the largest block out of all of them, the oil cracker. Just to give you guys a sense of scale on this thing. it is not a small block. And that's something that you run into a lot with in Industrial Overhaul. And so trying to produce a full-scale mobile base, a production rover, you're not going to be able to have all your production capabilities unless you make a full-scale road train. So, I'm not saying that it can't be done. It takes a lot more to it than in vanilla. Now, something else that I get to touch on right now is we have our unknown signals. Now, in most cases, these don't often offer you very much. However, with Industrial Overhaul, unless you're running a mod like Oscrap, these become incredibly useful. So the interior lights give us construction components and light bulbs. Light bulb being a bit that we can't produce immediately until we get a ceramic furnace going. The armor from the armor slopes, steel plate, is nice to have. Basic computers and motors from some of the other components are good too. The aluminum plate from the medium cargo container is going to be very useful to us, just because we need to find bauxite in order to get aluminum. And looks like our cargo's full because I still have a bunch of stuff in my inventory. Let's drop some of that off. I think I can get away with just pushing this down there and back over.
Fuel low.
Oh, when I do this.
Fuel critical.
Would you look at that? Apparently I have the trash cleanup settings set up a little too high. What I was trying to get to with that is that there are certain components on those unknown signals, namely the battery, that are very important to salvage early on. Like I said, unless you're running a mod like Oscrap. And that is because of the advanced computers and the lithium power cells. Those are two items that we won't be able to produce until later in the game unless we get very, very lucky with where we land. And so hunting down those unknown signals can be very beneficial early game. Go ahead and pick up our hydrogen because we're going to be doing that. Yeah. As you can see, from the stone, we're producing gravel as per usual, along with iron, nickel, silicon, which are the standard, but then we also get copper out of it. Let's grab some steel plate, because we are going to need those, and let's slap down an assembling bench. We're just going to put it facing this way. So if we look at this here, we can see all the components that we need, that's down for our ingot. Then see that we need 9 copper wire, and that's going to be for the computers here. So we'll just queue up another 10 because we'll end up needing it later for. Now, I will give fair warning to you guys. If you don't like a very tedious, grindy start in Space Engineers, this is not going to be a mod that you will likely enjoy. Because getting to the point of being able to build much of anything is a very long, tedious process to start off with. Because, like I said, from survival kit to then assembling bench, to get to the point where you can get rid of the assembling bench, you need to have 6 other production blocks constructed before you can really get to that point. And so, if you don't exactly have the patience for that, this mod can become incredibly aggravating very, very quickly. Now, if you're someone like me who appreciates a bit of a grindy start, then, yeah, this mod may very well be perfect for you. Let's go pick up stone before it rolls too far away. In fact, we'll just throw it back down. So you may notice that, the survival kit is producing fairly slow. This is due in part to how the mod adjusts things, but mostly in how you have to have the world settings set. You have to have the assembler efficiency set to realistic, so that X1, because if you have it set higher, you'll actually consume partial components. It's not necessarily game breaking, but you'll frequently find yourself with, 0.02 copper wire that the only way to really get rid of the partial components in your inventory is to run them through the incinerator. Basically just destroy them. Or just, continuously produce components and hope that you can get to a point where eventually, you break even again. But, since I prefer to not run into that, I personally will just set the assembler efficiency to realistic and deal with the fact that, starting off again, things tend to run very, very slowly. Not all bad though. We can appreciate this lovely little skybox that I've got. I will admit, I get tired sometimes of just the vanilla skybox. So running some of these others is a very nice change. Move the computers back to the key just to let the copper wire fall loose. Now, with the way that I generally set up my starting platforms with Industrial Overhaul, there is going to be a lot of manually moving components around between machines and whatnot. Which, again, can be a little bit tedious at first, but I find that, at least in terms of resource cost, it's cheaper than trying to connect everything together, conveyor lines, or just, access port to access port. So, when you guys create your starting platform, if you want to go through and make sure that everything, is conveyored up so that you don't have to manually pull from one production point to another, by all means. This is more so just from my own personal preference. Not sure if this is supposed to be a fog or a snowstorm. Is the weather fog? Okay. There we go. That gives us a full assembling bench. Now, we'll need to get some wind turbines put up onto this before we can use it. But since we have that built, we can at least look at what we can produce with it. So for a quick refresher from the survival kit, we've got our ore refinement, which will stay with the survival kit for the time being. But we can produce copper wire, electromagnets, basic computers, construction components, and steel plating. From the assembling bench, we can now produce acid power cells, alkaline power cells, CLG autocannon, magazines, heating elements, light bulbs, large steel tubes, motors, radio communication components, and small steel tubes. Along with, our tools. So, this gives us some more tons, and this is going to be everything that we need to initially get started. Now, for the acid and alkaline power cells, these are related to corresponding batteries of the same name. So let's go ahead and clear off this toolbar. So if we come down to our power blocks, you can see we have alkaline battery, which the description on that, simple dissimilar metal battery, produces a small amount of power, cannot be recharged. So for the alkaline batteries, it's you build it and it's built with full charge. And then, as you use it, it depletes. Once it's depleted, you have to grind it down, which will destroy the power cells. Which means you then have to produce new power cells to rebuild it. And then, wash, rinse, repeat. You then have the acid battery, which is a simple sulfuric acid battery. Stores a moderate amount of power. Acid power cells are not reusable, meaning that, again, when, if you were to grind one of these batteries down, the acid power cells get destroyed when you grind them down. And it has a 75% charging efficiency, meaning that, you put, you only get 75% out of what you put in. Then from there, we have our lithium battery. Stores a large amount of power, and the lithium cells are reused. This has a 95% charging efficiency. And then once we get to very advanced stuff, we get the electron matrix, which has a 100% charge efficiency, meaning you put 250 megawatt hours in, you get 250 megawatt hours back. And that's why early on, if you have the unknown signals, it can be invaluable to go after them, because you can grind those down and you get the components out of the small battery. Grind down 10 of those small batteries, and you in turn get enough components to build a large small grid battery. In terms of the advanced computers and lithium power cells that you need. So let's go ahead and get some power applied to this grid. This, we're going to need even more copper wire than what's initially required, since we have the electromagnets and computers. In total, that's going to be an extra 30 copper wire. And with setting up the power production, this brings us into, once again, yet one more adjustment made through Industrial Overhaul. And that is power consumption by grids, by production blocks. So just about everything uses a little more power. And since we need more blocks, more production at the very beginning, that on its own means that you need more power production to start off with than just, the standard 3 wind turbines that you can get away with in standard vanilla. Because I think, for a basic production base with a full assembler, a full refinery, you need, I think, at most 6 wind turbines to power that. You end up needing a lot more than just 6 wind turbines to power a basic starting platform in Industrial Overhaul. 1 wind turbine will give us enough for the assembling bench. So we can see the optimal output of this is going to be about 300 kilowatts, which is 3 times what we need for the assembling bench. So the assembling bench uses 1 kilowatt idle and 100 kilowatts when active. So with just that 1 turbine, we'll be able to get this running. the unknown signal, which means now I'll actually be able to, since I don't have my inventory completely full, once it lands, I'll be able to do a more proper demonstration of what I was trying to show earlier with the component harvesting. Let's go ahead and grade it. Now, normally you could just do a straight line flight out. However, since in this playthrough I'm running with the aerodynamics, we got to be a little more careful. Also have our drill out, that way we can do a little bit of scouting as we go after some of these unknown signals. Again, grind down all the lights so that we can get the light bulb from those. Then yeah, you can see here on this small lithium battery, we get 2 advanced computers and 2 lithium power cells to go into this. We grind it down, and we get those lithium power cells back. So, like I said, unless you're running a mod like off scrap, and even if you are running off scrap, running after these unknown signals, I would say is highly advisable if you're running Industrial Overhaul. Because even if all you're getting back is, the scrap components, those components, I would say, are invaluable to your initial start. Let's go ahead and run right up the back wall. Gotta be very careful with that heat level, with the aerodynamics and depth of your entry.
Energy.
So we'll go ahead
low.
and we'll dump what components we can here into our assembly bench, and everything else, the aluminum plate, the advanced computer, and the lithium power cells, along with the space credits and all that, we'll just dump into the passenger seat here. Which means that now we can also take the light bulb motor and small steel tube that we put in there earlier and stick them in here. So, going back to something that I mentioned earlier, as far as some of the other components requiring a lot of sub components, the motor is actually a really good example of that. So to build a motor, you need copper wire, large steel tube, and electromagnet. The Copper wire, as we've seen, requires copper. Large steel tube needs iron. Then the electromagnet needs iron and copper wire. So to build a motor, you have to build electromagnets. You need to have copper wire on hand, as well as a large steel tube. But then you also need to build more copper wire for the electromagnets. So for a lot of that reason, once you get a bit further ahead with some of your production, once you're able to either start producing advanced computers, or if you've just salvaged enough of them from drop pods and such, building a programmable block and running the Izzy's inventory manager script it reduces a lot of headache with the production side of things, because you can use it to ensure that you always have material on hand. You can set certain things to be stockpiled at specific quantities, and with a bit of patience, you can teach the script how to produce all of the different components. You have to have it learn them one at a time, but you can get it done. Also helps to prevent the inputs from clogging up, which will happen. It can happen quite easily, especially if you have a lot of gravel in your system. So, once you're able to get a programmable block built, it is very, very beneficial to do so. Certainly not a requirement, of course, but, in my opinion at least, it makes life a lot easier in the beginning. Here we go. Last few components that we need. Then, we no longer have to use the survival kit for production. We can do all of that here. All things considered, since we are on a ice field, I think I'll demonstrate the hydrogen power production fairly early on, as that's going to be very useful to us in our present environment. There we go. That means that we now have enough power to start running this. Also means that we can now start draining all of the ingots and running them into there. And back down to stuff. So from here, I think the next logical step is expanding some of our production capabilities. Let's go ahead, expand our platform a little bit because we're definitely going to need it. Let's start laying out some of our other production. So we'll put our plate stamp with one of the ports open off to the side, just so that we can access it from there. Then we'll set down our wire dryer and our extruder. And we'll leave it at those, at least to start off with. Now, there really isn't any technical, best order for which of these you build first, as all three of these have components that the other two produce. So really it just kind of comes down to, just, your own personal preference on which you build first, and then just kind of go from there. So, we're going to go ahead and get these built up, and then, I'll fast forward through that. And once we get those built, we'll start looking into building our first rover, because we are going to want to try and get mobile relatively quickly. So, I will see you guys back for that in just a moment. We now have everything built up. I also added a couple more wind turbines to our tower, as we're going to need those in probably a second tower in order to be able to effectively run these three new production blocks, because each of these, if we come here into the control panel, has a max required input of 1.5 megawatts. And remember, optimal output for each of these is going to be 300 kilowatts. So, all three of these combined, optimal output is, going to be about 900 kilowatts. That's assuming that they are running at, we're getting a good speed, perfect clearance, all that. 10 to 1, we're probably not going to be getting that full draw. So in order to power all of these, you will need 2 of these towers. But, that's all those built. And for a frame of reference, I'm currently at just under 2 hours of recorded time. And, that is, taking some breaks and whatnot, running after unknown signals, explaining some of this to you guys. But, we're looking, you're looking at an hour and a half, give or take, to get everything produced up to this point. So, something to keep in mind as you guys are working through these scenarios is, as I've mentioned a little bit earlier, the starting bit with this, it takes some time. So, once we get to this point, we can start looking at building cargo rovers. As, being able to drive around is very important with Industrial Overhaul. And that is because ore deposits form fairly far apart. You're looking at an average of 1 to 2 kilometers between deposit fields. And this is because each ore field is just a single ore type. You don't have a cluster where you'll find iron, nickel, silicon, or iron and cobalt, or gold and silver. You're not going to find these mixed patches. It's going to be a single massive ore patch of just one ore type. And so you end up with a much wider spread. So being able to drive is going to be very, very important. And once you get the resources to build flying ships, especially with the upcoming automatons update, that's actually going to be that's going to become very, very useful for industrial overhaul. And as we get a bit further into this little series, you guys will probably see why. So, before we get into a lot of that, let's take a look at what we have available for building our first rover. Now, right now, we can't build a standard wheel because we need to be able to produce rubber, which that requires polymers that come from refining down oil sand, which that whole process requires a few other resources to build the necessary equipment. So the standard wheels, we're not going to be able to build those anytime. Instead, what Clockwork, the mod creator, did is he put in a special wheel type, specifically for Industrial Overhaul, as a early stage wheel, that being the metal wheel suspension. Now these are comparable to a 3x3 standard wheel. However, the suspension doesn't have as much of a range of movement for the ride height. Your traction isn't going to be as great. You're not going to have as great power. So they're weaker wheels than the regular counterparts. But all you need is a steel plate, construction components, copper wire, small steel tube, motor, and I believe some large steel tube for the wheel itself. So these are going to be the main bit that we are going to be running. That's going to be our wheel. Now for cargo, if you haven't been able to salvage a whole lot of unknown signals, or if you're running scrap, and so you're not getting the full material back from that, you're not going to be able to do a regular cargo container. So instead, you'll want to use one of these transport crates. Now they come in two sizes for the small grid. You have a larger one and a little small one. So you have a 5x5 and then a 5x, I'll say it's either 10 or 15. So you got the two different sizes of the crates. Now the next bit is going to be your cockpit blocks. To start off with, you're going to have to use the control seat. Again, unless you've been salvaging material, because a full cockpit requires, displays and advanced computers. Displays need plastic, which you need polymers to be able to produce. So your control is going to be a control seat. So to start off with, you're probably not going to have a pressurized cockpit. So something to keep in mind. Now our battery. Again, if we've been harvesting lithium power cells, we can do a lithium battery, but I'm going to play this as if we haven't been, or we just haven't been able to get a whole lot yet. So we're going to run this with an alkaline battery. Which, on the small grid, decent size for large grid, but for the small grid, they are small. And then, of course, the standard, light armor for your base frame. So that's going to be the basis for our rover. Now, I have one that I've previously built that utilizes a larger battery, the lithium power cell. If I actually looks like I have it. So that's probably going to be something that I'll pull from the respective world that it's in. But I have a small little box truck that uses the transport crate and all that, and it works really, really well for industrial overhaul. it takes a bit more iron just because I do have it built up a little bit more. But this you can do on just a simple, lay out your wheelbase and then slap your battery, your control seat, and transport crate on top of that and call it a day. You're also going to want a gyroscope. Which, these you can produce early on. They just need a fair bit of steel plate. But, with where we're at currently, we could, fairly easily build ourselves our first rover. So, we'll start into that with our next episode. Building up a rover, exploring your surroundings for ore, and establishing advanced power production in way of hydrogen power. So, that's what you guys have to look forward to from the next episode. And, I hope you guys, found this at least informative. So, until next time, take care.